support for the podcast comes from Lessen the Loads Laundry Solutions. Their business model is simple, but their impact is mighty. They are moms who help parents. Lessen the Loads is a woman-owned and operated laundry and organizational service. As moms themselves, they know there aren't enough hours in the day for everything to get done. That's why they're here to lessen your loads. Whether it's helping to get your spaces organized or tackling those piles of laundry once and for all, Lessen the Loads is there for you and your family. With pickup, drop-off, wash, dry, and fold, simply leave your laundry outside and they'll do the rest, bringing it back to you within 24 hours or sooner. If you'd like in-home fold and put away or in-home full service, Lessen the Loads is here to save the day. Yes, you heard that correctly. They will come to your home. With this service, your matched mom will come to your home, utilize your washer, dryer, and laundry products to fulfill your family's weekly laundry needs, including folding and putting away. Lessen the Loads also offers organization services, which include refolding, organizing drawers and closets, and pantries using their specialty method inspired by Marie Kondo. Lessen the Loads currently services the following Pennsylvania counties: Chester, Delaware, Berks, Bucks, Montgomery, and parts of Philadelphia, and they are growing every day. For more information or to book, visit lessentheloads.com. Hello and welcome back to Parenting Stuff I Wish I Knew Sooner and Want You to Know Now. I am your host, Erica Desper, founder of the Center for Confident Parenting and a mom who seemed and still seems to learn everything I need to know about momming the hard way. My guest today is Liz Shiver, a licensed marriage and family therapist at the Pediatric Psychology Center of Chester County, working with children and their families to create positive, lasting changes in the lives of her clients. Liz specializes in treating trauma in children, particularly girls and young women, and is certified in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. That is a mouthful. Liz, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Erica. Thank you for the intro.
I think it was not quite as coffee fueled as usual, or maybe it was too coffee fueled. I'm not sure what happened there, but
no such thing.
We are gonna roll with it. I do not pretend to be a polished podcaster, but I'm very excited that you are here. Before we dig into our topic, tell us just a little bit about yourself and how or why you came to land in offering this type of support.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I am located in Philadelphia, but I work in Chester County. I went to LaSalle and I did my training at a place called the Center for Families and Relationships in Philadelphia. And it was an agency model. We served a lot of families, and in an agency, you don't really get to pick who you want to work with. It's kind of like you get what you get and you don't get upset. But I would always kind of be finagling for, or like cajoling the front desk person to be like, if there's any teens, can you send them my way? Because I really, as time went on, felt so connected to my work with them. I don't know what that says about me, because I feel like I'm the most like genuine version of myself when I work with them. So I don't know if it's good or bad, but I've always loved like
teen spirit.
I know. I love that pun. I've always loved like coming of age books and movies. Like This Boy's Life was one of my favorite books, or the movie Almost Famous with Kate Hudson is like probably my favorite movie ever. If you haven't seen it, you definitely should. It's just like it's such a tender. Yes, it's such a tender time in your development, but it's also, the older I get, the more I can accept, like, we continue to grow and change. And like your adolescence is just kind of like that very first part of the journey, so to speak. So I have a lot of empathy for them, and I love working with them, and I kind of see them as like, we're guiding you through this together, like me, your parents, your teachers, your pediatrician, like we're all there to kind of help guide you through. And I find my work like really fulfilling. I love it.
That's awesome. And I'm sure because you have that teen spirit, they find you very relatable and down to earth. And if you have a teenager, you know how important it is to connect before you accomplish anything else. So you do a lot of work with teens. As the parent of one at the time of this recording, my son's about to turn 14. I can attest to the fact that communication and relationships can quickly become very strained around these ages. Can you first speak to why
we all joke about it. Like there's the terrible twos and there's all these different phases. And one is like entering the teen years, right? What about this time frame makes relationships and communication so challenging?
Yes, absolutely. Um, so I can start with kind of the psychoeducational piece, not to frame it as like getting boring right off the bat, but
Right? Let's get
so much
academic.
so much of it is like where their brains are physically. Like I think something that adults forget sometimes is that, teenagers are not adults. Their
Mm,
brains are continuing to form. Their prefrontal cortex, which is the decision making part of your brain, is not fully formed. It's in the process of doing that. So no wonder they make dumb decisions like, I'm going to, send this Snapchat message that I really should not send. Um, that's it. Also goes to like impulsivity and like why they kind of do what they do. They're also, a lot of parents would be like, oh, the hormones. It is a
mm,
part of it. Combined with brain changing, the hormones that are going on, what happens academically. So many kids, struggle in ninth grade. The social changes that are happening, pressure from parents. We won't even get into social media and all the other complications that it adds with it, but they're just like emotional tornadoes. And it's all, not to make them blameless, because I definitely think that there's areas that we can help them in making better decisions. But, a lot of it is kind of out of their control. I like to encourage parents to think about what it was like when you were a teenager. And I've had some parents say to me, well, Liz, like, that's so different. When I was a teenager in 1960, whatever, like when I was a teenager in 1980, like it wasn't like this. We didn't have Snapchat. We didn't have, all these things that are going on. Like, why is my daughter crying about her Snapstreams? But like I always say like the nouns change, but I think the verbs are the same, the emotions are the same. Like you're trying to figure out who you are, and like it's such a time of like insecurity, feeling unsure of yourself, like worried about the future. Like a lot of kids talk to me about that. Like they don't know what the future holds, and like I can look back now 15 years later and say like it all worked out for me because it did, but like they don't know that. They don't know a lot of the things that we have seen happen and that we've seen like actually work out for us. So I always encourage parents to just like think about that time and like how turbulent it really can be, and we want to be the guiding light to them rather than part of the problem. um the other part is, oh, okay, that's what attitude. Oh, we can get to that later.
yeah, yeah.
I think something
That's
else to keep
coming. Stay tuned.
in something else, well, kind of along the same line, something else to keep in mind. I think a lot of times adults don't realize how they change their communication when they're talking to adolescents. Sometimes it
Mm,
can be like, well, they're giving me the attitude, or like they're snapping at me. And like that's understandable, but we can't have the same reaction as we would if it was, a coworker doing that to us or our partner doing that to us, because they're not on the same developmental level. And I think a
right.
lot of times, if we look at it, a lot of times all my clients know this, I talk about things through a lens, like looking at it through their lens, or like I frame things like everyone in a family, it's like you're interacting with a GoPro strapped to your forehead. And if you go back and your interactions, like you're going to have like five different versions of like five different Netflix shows of like what's going on for everyone in that
Yeah,
family. So
that's
from
a
their
really good
footage,
analogy.
yeah, from their footage, I think a lot of times they feel demoralized. Like I think
Mhm.
a lot of times, because of their decision making, because of like kind of their lack of emotional regulation or the things they're working on, they get a lot of criticism. They get a lot of like, kind of like, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're doing, shut up and listen to me. Whether or not an adult says that, that's kind of the message that they're getting. And they get
Right.
that all day long from like parents, teachers, coaches, you know, it's all kind of all about the negative things that are going on. So I think when we get that like attitude, or we get that like, kind of bite back, it's because it's like the 90th time that day they've felt that way. And we as adults, I think it's our responsibility to model what the appropriate response is, and like kind of coach them through it. And I will say, like, I don't hear this too much anymore from the population that I work with, but I think the adults that, really want to I will say harp on disrespect and say,
Mm,
you have to give respect to get respect, are some of the most disrespectful people I've ever spoken with. And they would never
mm,
speak to another adult the way that they're demeaning and like criticizing their teenager. And you can't like,
interesting.
the way to
Yeah.
hold boundaries and keep expectations without kind of hammering on them in that way. And I noticed that a
Mm,
lot of times when I will work with parents who my clients will tell me, and they get infuriated the parents will present completely a different way in front of me than they are at home. And I fully know that. Like, I'm fully prepared for that. In fact, I'll coach them on it. I'm like, I know your parents are going to be on their best behavior when they're here. That's fine. I know it's not like that at home. And if I'm feeling particularly ballsy, I'll be like, oh, Mom, is that how you said that? Like, today in the car? Is that how you responded?
Right?
And
Oh,
they'll be
good
like,
for you.
well, no, Liz, it was a little different. And I'm like, yeah, it's okay. Like, I understand that. But I would encourage
But let's
parents,
put it out.
yes, I would encourage parents to just think about where your child is at. Kind of try to see it through their lens, because that's how we can coach them to be the like emotionally sound, successful, happy adults that we want them to be. It's kind of like you have to kind of think it's their idea, help them think it's their idea in the first place.
Yeah,
So
I call that a Jedi mind trick. I use that on the younger ones. When my young clients don't want to use the potty, we have to figure out how to make them think that they want to, because they want to, not because we want them to. So I totally get that concept.
Exactly.
I maybe need practice doing that at this older age. So
it's so
yeah, go ahead.
Well, the way I frame it so funny, you bring up Jedi mind tricks. I always like to frame it like for my big fat Greek wedding, when they're like, if you want to be able to do anything, you have to convince the man it's his idea to like let you do it. Like, that's kind of like teenagers, but it's actually in a positive way. Like, we want to empower them to feel confident in themselves that they're making good decisions and they're like thinking through things the way we want them to be. But if we're constantly criticizing them and only pointing out the negative, they're never going to get there on their own. They won't have that confidence. So I love a Jedi mind trick as well.
That is so interesting. So I'm like, as you're talking, I'm of course reflecting on scenarios that have happened in our house recently. And it might be something as simple as me saying like, dude, could you, I just tripped over your shoes. Like, where do your shoes go? Or, can you use the hook? Don't throw your coat on the floor. Simple, kind. And I'll get an explosion of like, I know, I forget everything all the time. I am the worst. And I'm like, hey, I did it. Like,
yeah.
And then the story I'm telling myself is that he's trying to be dramatic. Like, it's almost like a guilt trip, like a teen guilt trip. Well, she'll feel so bad that she'll just be like, oh, sorry, buddy. But maybe that's through my lens. And that's how he actually feels in that moment. All I hear are criticisms and things that I forgot to do. But I don't know. What do you think when you hear me walk through that scenario?
Well, I definitely don't think that you're doing anything wrong, and I think it's totally appropriate to ask your teenager to put things away, or, I think it's totally appropriate, and you're probably not doing anything wrong, so to speak.
Right.
I appreciate being able to look at that through his lens. I would say, as somebody who works with adolescents, you can only be manipulated if you believe that you can be. Like, you can only, like, I'll have parents say to me, this is in the past, no one I work with now, well, she's so manipulative and she does it on purpose. And I would respond with, well, children aren't manipulative. They're just trying to get their needs met. And that was met with displeasure from the parents who said that to me. But,
absolutely. Yes.
Like, it is our job to be the emotionally regulated, lighthouse in the storm for them. And I don't think anyone should tolerate, coarse language, or I'm fine with swearing, but I think if we're doing it at someone or saying like demeaning things to them, shut up, you stupid idiot, like, that's not okay.
Right, that's different.
For a teenager to be responding. But if they're like on it, like, a lot of times it just behooves you to ignore those kinds of responses, because it's like, all right, well, you're doing it. Like, it's kind of how you're a coach to deal with passive aggressive coworkers. Like, if they're like, sure, Erica, I'm on it. And you're like, great, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Like,
thanks so much for being willing.
I love that. It's kind of like a pick your battle situation. But as far as if you wanted to address it, you can say, like, in a non-defensive way, and we'll kind of get into this, like, hey, sounds like you're frustrated. I get that. Okay. If it came off that way, I'm sorry. If you could put your shoes away, I appreciate it. Kind of like validating what they're going through, but also being like, this does not have to turn into a thing. Like, not what I intended. Thank you for following through.
Because I think my usual response is like, buddy, that's not true. And like, now I've forgotten about the coat and the shoes. So A, that probably doesn't get done. And B, I might be just like, I don't know what I'm doing in that moment, but definitely derails us from where we originally were.
Yeah.
And I'm telling him his feelings aren't valid, right? No, that's not true. Which is probably another thing we don't want to do.
Well, but I wouldn't beat yourself up about it because that's, it's because it's from your perspective, it wasn't. So I think a lot of times I try to think with all interactions with everyone, I try to think about intention. And, sometimes we have, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And if it doesn't come across that way, we can just say, hey, it's not what I meant. I see how you thought about it that way, or I see how you saw it that way. Sorry, it came off that way. This is what I meant. And kind of keeping it moving.
Just reframe it.
And also just knowing, they're like emotional tornadoes. Like maybe it was the 90th time that day that somebody felt like someone was criticizing them. And,
right.
You're kind of, the more that you can model the behavior, I think the better the results can be.
All right, awesome. So that was already digging into a specific scenario. I kind of got ahead of ourselves, so we are going to do that a little bit more. So I think it's so helpful as a parent navigating every minute of every day with a teenager. So our goal today is to learn as a parent to communicate more effectively with our teens, which it sounds like the burden of that logical ideal communication is going to fall on us for a good bit longer. So we're focusing less on maybe what they're saying, what they're doing, what their face is doing, and more about our reaction or hopefully a response less than, not a reaction to that. So first, let's start with identifying what communication issues are parents and teens most commonly getting stuck in. Like where are the disconnects happening? What's super challenging?
So the three most common ones that I see, and I'll have parents call for these reasons. The first one is my teenager won't talk to me. They don't tell me anything. I get like, how was school? Fine. How is so-and-so? Fine. No elaborating, going up to their room, slamming their door, which teenagers, but by the way, parents, teenagers being in their room is totally normal. It is not a cause for alarm. Like, doesn't matter what you smell, doesn't matter what you're hearing in there. Like, it's okay. Number two is, every time I try to talk to them, they freak out. I get a big emotional reaction. I get tears, like, door slamming, worse than that kind of thing. And then the third problem, I think that the first two problems kind of have the same solution. The third problem that I hear about is, I can't give my teenager any kind of consequence because either of their mental health issues or because their emotional reactivity. And a lot of parents tell me like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work when I try to take their phone away. It doesn't work. They, because they threaten to like X, Y, and Z. So the first two, as far as like my teen won't talk to me, I usually find it's for three reasons. I won't even call them mistakes. I'll call them missteps that parents typically take. And it has the best of intentions. I think usually what it ends up being around is when a teenager is kind of giving some kind of glimpse into their internal workings or their kind of like internal world with like I think I might be depressed, or like, oh, like my best friend hates me, like we're in a fight, like this is happening. So the first kind of misstep I see parents making is invalidating their experience or invalidating their feelings. I have a lot of parents push back on the invalidation. I will get to that part.
Okay.
So
like, oh, honey, that's not true. Your best friend doesn't hate you. That's what we're talking about, right?
Or like, well, sweetie, everyone feels that way. Or like, hey, listen, it's really not that big of a deal. Like in the long run, like it's all going to work out. Or the dreaded, well, when I was your age, I felt that way all the time, and look how I turned out. Because we're the biggest idiots in the world. So like that's not gonna work.
Right? Maybe not the road you want to go.
Yes, I promise I'm not laughing at this. It's just sometimes it is funny.
Yes.
So we have to kind of think about like how they're interpreting that, which they tend to even though we're
trying to relate. And we're trying to make them feel better. That's our intention, our good intention.
Yes. And I do think the other good intention that parents could probably take a step back from is trying to solve their distress. I think with the prevalence of like, further mental health care, like, a lot of teenagers have the language for that now. Like parents are so much more aware of those things. It is important, but it is also not our job to solve your child's distress. It is okay if they're in distress. I tell parents all the time, like if someone is, sitting in front of me sobbing, like I can't take their pain away. That's not really my job as a clinician. It's my job to help guide them through it and see like the strength within themselves. And I'm just there to bear witness to their experience. And it can be, I think, a lot of adults who help kids, parents, teachers, therapists, etc., like devalue that as our own skill of just us being present with somebody while they're feeling pain says so much about like how we're supporting them. So
just holding space.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think for the parents that are maybe a little bit more resistant to like the woo-woo-ness of therapy, like I promise you, like it does work. It really does. You don't have to have a
It's hard. I
solution.
mean, like all these things, they're easier said than
Yeah.
done. It's been our job for so long to, or we've thought it was our job for so long to rescue. Um, fix the boo-boos, redirect your toddlers trying to steal someone's toy, and like no one tells you like, hey, you need to like wind that down and back off of that now.
I would like to frame it as the steps back that you're taking, or like the change in approach, is the adolescent equivalent of kissing boo-boos. I really think it is. It just kind of comes
I
off.
like that.
It's in a different way. So what kids interpret this as, adolescents interpret this as, is like, you're not listening to me. Like, I didn't ask about what it was like in 1980, Mom. I told you what's going on now. Like, you're not listening to me. The other misstep I find parents making, and as an emotional person, I do understand this, is parents' emotional reactivity. So even like, Mom, I think I might be depressed. Oh, sweetie, oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm going to be depressed. Like, which we're definitely allowed to have our own emotions. Like, we're definitely allowed to get frustrated. Like, I can remember, like, my parents being like, oh, why are you upset? Like, what did I do? Or like, how can I fix this kind of thing? It's okay. Again, it's okay for them to feel distress. But when a parent has a particularly like reactive reaction, let's say, kids sometimes interpret that as like, oh no, I shared something about myself and I made my mom upset. Or like, I was honest with my dad and now he's mad at me. Like, I caused their distress. And again, definitely not our intention at all as adults. Sometimes, I'm you've seen me. I'm very expressive. I have a lot of emotions. My supervisor would always be like, Liz, you have a very loud face. You need to calm it down. I'll try to tell kids like, hey, you're not hurting me, or like, you're not offending me, or even like if I get emotional, I'm like, you're not making me sad. Like, I'm just here with you when we're doing that. So that can be a way to approach it. But definitely practicing emotional regulation, which does not mean shutting off your emotions, is really helpful in that moment. The other thing that I see is parents jumping to a solution rather than having reflection. It's like, oh no, just call them and apologize and everything will be fine. Or like, oh no, sweetie, which like a lot of times they have great suggestions, but we're not listening first. That's something a lot of times I relate parenting to therapy a lot, even though I know it's way different. I only see them for an hour a week. Way different than having a child 24/7. Like, I a lot of times I'll talk to somebody and I know the solution. Like, I know what they should do. But if I just said like, yeah, Erica, do X, Y, and Z and it'll be fine, you'd be like, you don't know me. Like, who are
Right.
you? Like,
And
I
like,
just met you.
and like, how about giving me time to think of a solution?
Yes. Like, so I think sometimes it gets interpreted as that way of like, you're not listening to me, or like, you think I'm dumb, you think I can't figure this out myself.
You don't
like,
think I can handle this, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's typically where I see like the missteps with like, if a teenager won't talk to them. The other one I see with the second communication problem, like every time I try to talk to them about something, they freak out. Like, maybe it's one of the big ones, like, hey, we know you're vaping, or like, hey, I know you snuck out, or maybe it's even smaller of like, hey,
Right.
what's this C on your math test kind of thing.
Right.
And you get this big emotional reaction, like, you never listen to me, I never, like tears, crying, stomping up the stairs, like kind of the typical big emotional teenage reactions. I do find it's probably because there's been a history of the responses that are happening before, and it's like, this again, like, I'm done with this. Like, and then again,
it's a pattern of behavior.
Yes, they don't necessarily have the emotional regulation skills to be like, Mom, I'm really frustrated because every time you approach me about this, like, I get this response and I don't like that. Like, they're not, again, we're trying to build them up to that place, but they're like not quite there
Right.
yet. So that's where I find there's probably a history of it. There's also, to be honest with you, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I think sometimes parents maybe are not really honest with themselves about how they're reacting sometimes to things, even if it's like, I work with a lot of really successful people who they have very high stress jobs and they handle it well, but then like one thing goes wrong at home and they're like, this is terrible, everything's, like they're just kind of
like a straw that, yeah.
Yes,
Exactly.
and they're just kind of a reactive person. And I think parents are much more self-aware now and we'll kind of put that together, but I think sometimes we need to look at ourselves and how we're reacting to things. Even like my mom tells a story of like when I was little and like she noticed I would say, how about we do blah blah blah, or like, how about I get some ice cream, and she realized she said that to me all the time, like, Elizabeth, how about we clean up our toys? like, even, they pick up on that behavior. So I think
Absolutely.
sometimes that does tend to be the culprit, but regardless, they won't talk to me or they freak out when I try to talk to them. Has the same solution. So this is adapted from, there's a book, it's not necessarily for parents to read, but if you I don't have time, because it's a therapeutic book called
Okay.
Teens Who Hurt by Kenneth V. Hardy and Tracy A. Lozofsky.
Okay.
Lozofsky, sorry. But it's this
Something like
technique that kind of came.
Don't worry,
Yeah.
she won't listen.
My God, if she did listen. Someday, Erica.
Sorry, Tracy.
But it's adapted from that, and I use this therapeutically, but I kind of teach parents a parental way to kind of do this. So it's called VCR, Validate, Challenge, Request. And
Okay.
this is where I mentioned before, I have a lot of parents who push back on me with validation. And they say, well, Liz, if I tell my kid it's okay, like, it's okay to feel depressed, or like, it's okay to be mad at your best friend, aren't I telling them that their behavior is okay? And I have to remind them constantly, no, that's not what you're saying. You're not saying, hey, it's okay to throw your phone because you got mad at me, but you're saying it's okay to feel angry. And that's a huge part of
Right.
emotional regulation in general, is just accepting how you feel. Like, I feel frustrated, I feel sad, I feel this, I feel that. Just accepting that instead of trying to push it down or push it away is a huge part of that. So validating what you see them going through. You're trying to reflect the feeling. You're trying to help them identify that in themselves. So, if it's like a fight with your best friend, and be like, wow, she said that to you? That's really mean. Or like, oh, that really hurts a lot. Like, oh, I'm sorry. Like, or if they say like, Mom, I think I might be depressed. Like, wow, I'm really sorry you feel that way. Like, oh, that's really tough. In the most genuine way you can. And if you're not like a touchy-feely kind of person, that's okay. You're just trying to help them see what you are seeing. Like, help them realize what the emotion is. So it's the reflection piece that's essential. When you feel like so as somebody who, like, this is my job, I can kind of like watch someone when, like, I can kind of see the body language when they feel validated. Like, I watch their shoulders fall, or like I watch them kind of be like, it is like that. Like, yes, that's what I'm saying. Like, just kind of like this relief of like, okay, like, you see what I'm talking about, kind of thing. Or even like more puzzled, like, I didn't realize I was feeling that, but I think that's accurate. Like, that is what I'm feeling. I am frustrated, or I
Put a
am
name
sad.
to it. Yeah.
Yes. So I try the next part, challenging. I try to preface it with, especially when you're first trying this out, is it okay if I ask you about it? Not like, do you want to talk about it? Because trust me, they don't want to talk about it. Is it's okay if I ask you questions about it? And so, as a therapist, I have a different role. But if they tell me no, I say, okay, no problem. If you're a parent, you can say like, okay, you know what? Thank you for telling me. And like, give them a hug, or like, give them, like, hey, we got this, kind of thing. And try to follow up on it later. Maybe when they're more calm. I think the asking part is really helpful, as opposed to like, we have to talk about this. Giving
That's
them,
like a version of a Jedi mind trick, right?
yes.
Like, hey, I'm happy to hear more, but you have total agency over whether we talk about this, at all now,
Yes.
whatever. Like, it's disarming, right, to approach it that way.
Absolutely. You'd be surprised. I probably shouldn't say this, but the amount of times, like, my Jedi mind trick is like, hey, you don't have to tell me about this at all. Like, you do not have to share
Reverse
anything about this
psychology.
with me. And they tell me every single time. So, but
right?
because it gives them the
Hot tip,
choice.
parents.
Yes, but
Yes.
it's like you're putting the ball in their
Right.
court, and you are letting them choose. Because I tell parents this all the time, and I think this is kind of what's hard about parenting teenagers. Like, we cannot make them do anything. We can't stop them from vaping. We can't stop them from like snapping back at their teachers at school. And like, parents, I think, get nervous because they just see how that progresses. They're like, so what happens in college? So what happens after? So what happens when they're signing up for a mortgage? Like, oh, the pressure to like fix it in that moment. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. I have those thoughts all the time, especially when I have teenagers telling me shit that I'm like,
right? I know.
no!
Well, and I think like depending on your own, like who you are, if a lack of control triggers your own anxiety, which it does for a lot of people, then you are responding to your child from an anxious place, which makes it really hard to do any of the things that you just said, right?
That is a great point. Actually, my colleague Matt was talking to a family that we work with, and he asked this parent, who is the parent here, you or your anxiety? And this parent was like, Like,
Oops.
really had not put that together. But it was such. Now, this parent was very emotionally intelligent and could like take that and like could.
Right. You couldn't just say that to anybody.
Right. But
Yeah.
and I totally get that. Like, I can't even imagine. I worry about my cat who's 12. Like, I can't even imagine what it's
Right.
like to worry about your 12-year-old child. Like, it sounds so unbearable to me. And like, it's tough to do these things. It really is. So if they're like, yeah, we can talk about it, ask them kind of a challenging question. Like, do you think your friend like meant to hurt your feelings? Or
Hmm.
like how long have you been feeling like this? Or like, do you think they
Mhm.
wanted to make you upset? Like something that's like kind of trying to get them in that direction of like thinking about it in a different way, or kind of considering the other lens of what's going on.
Yeah.
And just I try to keep it very open. Like, I don't have any kind of like pointed, direction I want them to go in. I just try to keep it kind of open ended for what could be going on.
Yeah.
And then the final step is request. So this in therapy is usually kind of getting them to engage in an intervention. From the parenting kind of interpretation of this, I work through this with kids where I'll say, okay, what do you feel like your options are in this situation? Like,
Hmm.
I do it. Of course, they don't understand the reference choose your own adventure, but it's kind of framed like that of like, and I do this a lot with when kids tell me about friend problems.
Loved those.
I
I think
know.
they still exist. Actually, they
Do
may
they?
know it. There's like a more modern version of it, but yeah.
Okay. Thank God. Um, I do this a lot with working through like conflicts with peers, even communication with parents. I'll do this from my end and say, okay, what do you feel like your options are? So like if you text her back and say X, Y, and Z, how do you think she could react? Like what do you
Right.
feel like the options are? Or like if you don't say anything to this person, what do you feel like could happen? And kind of just
Mhm.
walking them through it. And if you get to the point where they're like, I don't know, mom, like, "Oh, I don't know. Oh, okay. You know what? And then you can just end the conversation. We can talk about this later if you want to, if you're getting that kind of like resistance, because then you don't want to fall into like jumping to solutions. But
Yep.
we're trying to reflect things back on them. We're trying to empower them. I can do this. I can make my own decision, and you have someone here who can like coach you through it. And I'll get to the point with adolescents where they'll be like, "Well, Liz, what do you think I should do?" And I'll be like, "Well, I'm not living your life, so I'm not going to tell you, but let's talk about it together." And then if they really push me and they're like, "Well, if you were me, like, what would you do?" I would be like, "I would do X, Y, and Z," but that's me. Like, that's
Mhm.
how, because I could see this playing out this way, but like I want you to be the one to make the decision. And the more I kind of like emphasize that, while parents might think like, whoa, 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 they can't do that. You don't want them to see you thinking that, because then that tells them, I don't think you can do it. I don't think you can handle this. I don't think that you're responsible enough, smart enough, ready to do this. Now, if your child is like, I want my own apartment and to get married, no, you're not ready for those things. But like when it comes to, communicating about your emotions, or like
Within
communicating,
reason.
right. So we want to be empowering them and also kind of like coaching them through the problem solving. So the more you can reflect, the more. A lot of times I do this a lot with parents. This is another dated reference no teenager would be able to remember. But Columbo, like his whole thing was
Oh
like
yeah.
playing dumb, and then people would kind of like tell him exactly what the information he needed. So my
Yeah.
version of Columboing it is like, why do you think she'd say that to you? That's so crazy. Or like,
Right.
oh my gosh, like, wow,
Yeah.
like, I can't believe you feel that way. Like, oh, that's crazy. Like, God, I wonder why they would go on. And then like they kind of
Yeah.
help you, like include you in on
Right.
it, and kind of like help you through their thought process as well. So that's always kind of helpful, and also plays into their ideas that we're dumb and we don't understand. Like if they can help us understand, I think that's even better.
Right. And to interrupt you for a second, you touched on, maybe our child's reaction is based on a long history and they're kind of annoyed that you're bringing up the same things. I think that is really important to acknowledge too, because as parents, we have patterns of things that it's always easiest to say the thing we've said the last 75 times, or react the way we've reacted the last 175 times. But what we're talking about is like just the pause, don't go down that path,
Mm-hmm.
do it a little differently. And that it really does take not just awareness, but like a really active intention of like, okay, I'm not going to step in the footsteps that are already there. We're going to make new ones. It's not easy, but hearing this is at least the first piece of that.
Absolutely. I encourage everybody to pause. If you're feeling a really intense emotion or you're seeing somebody else have an intense reaction, just pause. That's all you need to do. Because that pause gives you the space to figure out what it is what do I want my next step to be. I try to encourage adolescents to do that as well. Like, you sense anger, frustration, like I know for me as an ADHD person, my anger goes from like 0 to 100. Like when I feel that the turbocharge turning on, I know I need to pause. It doesn't mean I'm not going to feel it. It just, I need to give myself the space to decide. Something else along the same lines that I think is actually really helpful if you're a parent who's trying to change course is apologizing to your teenager. I apologize to adolescents all the time for frankly things that
So powerful.
it really, really is, because it shows them, like, again, if we come at it from the lens of like, all these adults think I'm an idiot. Like, I'm messing this up constantly. A lot of teenagers know when they mess things up. They know when they yelled at their mom. They know when they like mouth off to their teacher. And they're like, why did I do that? If we come at it through that lens and showing them like, I'm not this almighty sanctimonious person that has no flaws. Like, I have them, and like I can totally show them to you. And I find it disarms them. Like, I have a really close friend. He and I both went to art school together, and now we both work with kids because, of course. But when he was teaching middle school art at a school for children with learning disabilities already, there was a boy who was just like, he was always getting in trouble. He was a sixth grader, and he was like, just always disrupting his class. And one day he was like, can you stay after class and talk to me? And all the kids left, and he was sitting there, and he was just had this like sour look on his face, and he was just so angry. And my friend was like, what's wrong? And he was like, whatever, this whole talk is pointless. Like, I'm the kid, you're the adult, you're always right, no matter what, you're not going to listen to me. And I was like, that's how they feel. Like, when we don't validate their experience, like, that's where the combativeness comes from, is like, we're like, that's what the message that they're getting from adults. And my friend was
It's like us versus them.
yes. Yeah. And like, all of our best intentions get interpreted that way if we don't validate first and we don't try to see it through their lens. And this kid, my friend knew he had a really challenging home life. He already had a learning disability. He was like there at this private school on scholarship. Like, he had so many things stacked. He was like one of the littlest kids in the class. Like, he had so many things stacked against him. And that's when my friend was like, I'm not right all the time, bud, and I'm sorry if I've like come across that way. And just doing that really like open up the discussion and like really just disarms them. And I'll do that all the time. Like, even if I like if they have kind of like I think I'm asking like what's a pretty typical question, and they'll have a like kind of don't ask me that response, to be like, I'm sorry, I probably should have asked you if that was okay.
Right.
I apologize. And they'll be like, oh, okay.
Now they answered.
Yeah. Or they won't, but they'll be like, thanks. And like, then it just like sets the tone for like,
you get a little street cred for the rest. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So then that probably is a good segue for the parents who are like, Liz, I'm not my child's friend. Like, we're not trying to be like the mom from Mean Girls. Like, oh, you girls keep me young. Like, you know what?
Yeah.
Where's the structure? Where is the consequences? Where are these things that like, I don't want to be a pushover gentle parent. So like, where is all that stuff? So kind of goes into the solution with the third communication issue that we see is like, I can't give my teen a consequence because of their mental health issues or because they're just so emotionally reactive. So I say I'm going to take your phone away, and they throw it across the room and break it. Or like, that's kind of extreme examples, but like, those are typically what I hear from parents. So as I said before, I do think this is kind of new just because of like, as mental health awareness expands, we're like, parents, I think, are more aware of the signs, even like, all the referrals that I get for kids who never would have flagged for ADHD 10 or 15 years ago. And parents are like seeing those signs, or like early intervention is showing up that they do need help. And as a result, I'm kind of seeing parents like as a new frontier, they feel kind of unsure. Like, they know how they would approach it with a typical kid. They feel very confident in like what their decision would be with a typical child. And yet when it comes to a child who's struggling, they feel very unmoored. I had this, a client who's doing a lot better now. She graduated from therapy. Before she came to me, she had a pretty serious suicide attempt, and her parents were obviously, her family was devastated, and she came to therapy pretty unwillingly, to be honest. And her parents just felt like they had no direction. They were like, well, we would tell her like before, like she would definitely get grounded for not cleaning her room, but like, we don't know what to do now. Like, and a lot of the work we did
over the edge.
Yes, a lot of the work we did together was like building up their confidence, building up their relationship together and their communication. But like, I felt for them completely. And like, there's no parent on earth who wouldn't question like what had gone on and what the best direction was. But I will say, and this is part of when I got trained in TFCBT, part of the model is reinforced with parent-child interaction therapy, which is not, I don't totally do that just because it's mainly for like younger kids and parents of younger children. But something they emphasize in children who experience trauma is a lot of times the caregivers or the adults in the situation, like the structure goes away. Like, oh, you experience this trauma, like, well, it's okay to have ice cream for dinner now, or you don't have to go to school, or like, oh, well, I can't really punish them because of like what they've been through. And the model really reinforces like you have to stick to it being normal. Because the message, unfortunately, that kids get if they're experiencing a mental health issue or like they're really going through it like behaviorally or they're having some kind of challenge, if parents change their structure or they have less of it, the kid says like, wow, I've messed up my family this much that now my parents they don't even punish me anymore. They don't even like,
which
they
is
can,
like a huge weight to carry on
yes,
top of
like
what they were already struggling with.
Like they don't even like make me come down to dinner anymore. And this is like what I've done to my family, like because of something that's outside of my control. So it is really important to maintain not necessarily like an iron fist, but like structure. The other part is too that it's like a blessing and a curse is, teenagers have the language now, like to describe what's going on in mental health terms. And sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it's not. And I've had clients tell me like high school puts me in fight or flight. And I'm like,
what they really mean to say is like, it stresses me out.
Yes, which high school is stressful, but fight or flight, like, so that's another thing too, is like parents will say like, she tells me she thinks she's bipolar. And I'm like, let's go through what the symptoms are. Like, let's provide some psychoed, or like, just because a teenager is describing it that way doesn't necessarily mean that is exactly what's going on. They don't have access to the DSM. I do. TikTok is not an accurate replacement for the DSM, which by the way,
thanks TikTok.
I am on TikTok. I do know what's floating on around there. I don't make videos because that would be embarrassing. I'm, in my 30s. But I do see kind of what circulates, especially like being on like therapist TikTok. And all that stuff is like, especially ones I see from like licensed professionals, it's helpful. Like I'm glad that like we're getting those ideas out there, but they just always seem to be twisted, and they just always seem to. I'm like, I'll have a kid tell me something. I'm like, that's not quite what that is, or like, no, that's not what that means. Like, no, you can't just like yell that at your friend. So regardless, the solution I feel like I can't parent my kid the way that I think I should because of their extreme reactions, their behavioral issues, or they're having mental health issues, is a couple of different concepts to keep in mind. So anyone can Google this. I literally have this laminated sitting next to me at my chair in my office. The concept of
I love that.
Oh yeah, and it's complete with markers that I hand to parents. It's called Baumrind Parenting Styles, BAUMRIND apostrophe S. So it's a chart that categorizes 4 parenting styles: authoritative, permissive, uninvolved, and authoritarian. And it has an axis of responsiveness and demandingness. So we want parents to be highly responsive, but also highly demanding, which means I have high expectations for you and I'm going to help you meet them every step of the way. And the analogy I use, the job I had before when I was in grad school, because this is a great job and I don't want to leave it, but I worked at a restaurant in Philly where the owners had really thought a lot about what their approach was going to be to managing their employees. And they were highly demanding, but also highly responsive. So they had like, we're having a wine expert come in every month and you guys are going to, take notes and try wine and learn how to describe it. And you're going to like understand the beer process and you're going to be able to describe every single item on the menu. But like, we're getting you trainings, we're getting you this. You can ask me any question. You can pull me off the floor to like, ask me a question about this. Like you want, X, Y, and Z training. Like we're going to get it. You say you need more pens. We're going to get them for you, but we're going to hold you to this really high standard. We want parents to be like that. Like if I expect you to get A's, and you're telling me that you're struggling in X, Y, and Z area, then I'm, going to get you a tutor. Then I'm going to, have open communication with you about what you feel like you need. If you want a quiet area to work and your siblings are playing, then I'll help you, you are allowed to go up to your room to do homework, etc. That's just kind of a basic example of having high expectations. I think it's the same thing with if my high expectation of you is that I want you to practice emotional regulation, that I'm going to be an emotionally regulated parent and I'm going to learn how to do that so that I can model that for you, so I can coach you through it. So something that I think I really try to stand by is setting expectations, consequences, and rewards. So I frame it like by the time kids make it to high school, it really is like a boss employee relationship. And that makes it sound very like clinical. I don't mean it in that way. It's just like your job goes from literally kissing boo-boos and changing diapers to like I'm guiding you. I'm like coaching you, but a lot of
Yeah,
it
I've
involves
heard of it as like a parent as a consultant,
mm,
which is like a good that was
yes.
helpful for me.
Yes. This might not be a great example because he was kind of uninvolved in his kids' lives, but I always go back to Atticus Finch, who he was like very reflective with his kid. Now, did they run all around Mississippi and get in trouble? Yes. But like he was really like about those big questions. He was like really reflective and like he didn't yell, but he like had expectations for them. I forget what the scene is where like one of them breaks something or like says something and he like has a response to it. Atticus Finching it, if you will. So
Right? There you go.
you want that boss employee relationship of being a good boss, of like the best bosses that I've had. The expectations were very clear. You're going to do this, you're going to do that. The consequences were clear. If you don't do this, you're not going to get your bonus, you're not going to get X, Y, and Z. If you do this, you're going to get this recognition, you're going to get this bonus, it's like a job expectation, like or job description, like it's all laid out there for you. We want to be like that with our teenagers. I think a great example of this is like maybe even for kids who are struggling or you can't give them the consequences. You know, if you want to be able to go to the football game on Friday with your friends, your room has to be clean, sheets have to be in the laundry room, and I can't see any incomplete assignments on, Schoology. Reasonable expectations. And that is set on Sunday. So when Friday rolls around and they're like scrambling to get the room done, or like before they go out, you're checking and you're like, I see a lot of missed things, I see a lot of zeros. Hey, you didn't meet the expectation. It doesn't have to be like a big blow up. It wouldn't be appropriate for a boss to have like a big emotional blow up. Like you want to be like, hey, you didn't meet this. I'm sorry, maybe next week. You're probably not going to get a great response. You're probably not going to, be happy. But that's the more that becomes the norm, you would be surprised. Like kids will be like, you get to the point where you're like, hey, I didn't do this assignment, so I guess I can't go. Like, and that's where you can be flexible. Or that's where you can like talk about it with them or possibly negotiate. But I don't want to, condone that. Same thing with reward.
And I'm worried a parent would hear that and go, well, that's just bribing them. But like, I in a work scenario, we wouldn't say that, right? We would say that's performing, that's doing your job, and then having expectations and consequences for that job.
That's a really good point. I learned from Erin, who I can't do work with little kids, and she does great with little kids. It's not an expectation if you set it ahead of time. So I've had, actually a client, incredibly sweet, who really struggled with social anxiety and was very hesitant to come in person for our session. And I told mom, it's not a bribe if you tell them ahead of time. So the agreement was if you're ready on time, you come see Miss Liz, like you don't, we're not late, and you make it there, we can go to McDonald's afterward. And that's an expectation. If a child is tantruming or like freaking out and you're like, sweetie, we'll go to Starbucks if you get in the car, that's a bribe.
Pull it out in the moment.
Yes, that's a bribe. But if you set the expectation ahead of time, it's an expectation.
That's a really good
yes
distinction. I always tell parents, because again, we do things that, rewards and consequences, sometimes in potty training, depending on the child and the situation, that if it smells of desperation, and then being very invested in how this turns out, it's probably a bribe.
Yeah.
Versus the expectation with the consequence or the reward.
Oh my gosh.
Like, just ask yourself, like, there's a card game we play in our family, and it's a company that makes a bunch of excellent games. They make, the unicorn, the exploding unicorns, all the exploding kittens, and, all the ones that people know. And in every instruction they give, they say under the cheating section, they go, if it feels like cheating, it's cheating. Move on.
Yep. That's incredibly
accurate. That's
how
I feel about bribes.
Yes.
If it looks like a bribe and smells like a bribe and sounds like a bribe, it's probably a bribe.
It's a bribe.
But that's not what you're talking about.
No. And the great part about this is too, it goes, if you're kind of trying to, our goal is to empower teens and to be like the lighthouse in the storm and kind of guide them through it. It really empowers them if you're like, I like to call it like a business meeting, like have a business meeting and be like, okay, here's what I'm thinking. Like, this is what I want to get done. Like, I call it contract negotiation. where like
Yeah.
I'll be like, come to session with all the things that you want. I'll joke around too, like 'cause
Yeah.
sometimes I have divorced parents and I'll be like, yeah, it's like when you got divorced, like each side
Right.
like has what they want. And then we talk about it. And like if a teenager's like, well, I want to have my phone, I don't want to like hand in my phone at night, and I want to be able to like do X, Y, and Z with my friends on the weekend, and I want to be able to do blah blah blah. And parents are like, okay, like noted. I want, X, Y, and Z. I want your homework done. I want, etc. And then we can like go back and forth and kind of, and everyone agrees. Like sometimes we'll even like sign off on it and be like, so these are these agreements. And there's really nothing, once something, it's kind of like the same thing with when you do legal, contract negotiation.
Yep.
Like once it's written down, there's really nothing to argue with because there's not the emotions kind of taken out of it. It's not that I'm directly asking you or demanding you. It's that like, this is what we agreed to. And you can really lean on that. And I think it also holds parents accountable too. I know lives are incredibly busy, and like I work with a lot of ADHD parents too who sometimes forget what they said, or like forget like they said they would do X, Y, and Z, but like that helps us hold ourselves accountable of like what we agreed to and help with the structure. So the same thing, I find we're doing this a lot with my kids that are kind of like working on their mental health and working on their functioning, and like parents, I think, feel a panic again of like, if they're in 10th grade and they can't make it to school or they're having meltdowns, like what are we going to do in college? And I'm like, slow your roll. Let's just work on making your bed
in the now, not the next.
Going to school every day, making your bed, brushing your teeth. Like, and we keep kind of, once they're successful, and we reward them for it, which is like, you do get your phone at night, or you do get to see your friends on Saturday, or you do get to have these things that parents would probably categorize as a privilege. It empowers them. And it's the same thing with like, I learned in my time in therapy, I had a great therapist who said, like, if you make your goals small and you're able to meet them, it makes you feel like you want to keep going. I think it's the same thing with these small changes that we're trying to make. You don't need to like overhaul the entire system. If you make the goals for yourself and for your child attainable, you'll meet them. You'll see their confidence grow. You'll feel better because you're watching their confidence grow. Your confidence in yourself will grow, and then everyone will feel better.
Absolutely.
And the final thing that I have for that is I really try to frame it to parents like, we're not kissing boo-boos anymore and holding hands. It's, teenagers are in the driver's seat. They're driving the bus. And we don't want to be like desperately holding onto the wheel, like trying to make them turn. We don't want to be backseat driving, because I think that's where a lot of like the communication missteps are interpreted as, is like backseat driving. And you don't want to be completely in the back, like asleep, like not aware of what's going on. We want to be in the passenger seat, waiting for them to turn around to ask for directions, waiting for them to turn around and say, like, they're at a crossroads. Which way should I go? That empowers them. That, again, what we've been reinforcing is that like they are capable. They do have the skills. We're going to help them meet those goals that they have for themselves, and we're going to coach them along the way. I've had parents kind of throw the driving the bus analogy back in my face and been like, she's asleep at the wheel, or like, I'm not going to let her drive at all. So
and my non-therapist response to that might be like, well, you tell me if this is okay. As a parent, when I hear you say like, wait for them to, turn around, I could see what that parent is saying. Like, what if they are so distracted they don't see the potential, for accidents up ahead? I don't think it means we can't say anything. Like, I could say like, hey, do you have a plan for what if you show up tonight and, your friend's not there and you feel like you don't know anybody? And he might not even think ahead to that, but I'm still not solving it. I'm not suggesting, I'm just sort of getting the wheels turning. Is that like, could that be helpful for if we feel like they're asleep at the wheel?
Absolutely. I would be, we're trying to empower them, and I can definitely, I think I've watched parents like, kids react poorly to like, have you thought about blah, blah, blah? Or like, do you have a plan for blah, blah, blah? So to be honest, I don't have a great antidote to that. The way I try to do it to them is like when I see someone careening off a cliff, I try to be really, really curious and reflective and be like, I like to use I wonder. Like,
yes.
Oh, I wonder what would happen if like they did respond though. Or like I wonder about like if someone so does say that to you. Like, and kind of in again like a Columbo, like I'm stupid, I don't know anything kind of way.
Yeah.
But I wonder, you'll now when you hear it, like my clients will probably like notice when I do it in session too. But it's kind of a
We're on to you, Liz.
Like, so for example, if we're talking about your teenager says that like they're going to a party, they promise there's not going to be drinking, they promise there's not going to be vaping, they promise like parents are home, whatever. And like being like, I wonder if somebody brings it though. Like, I wonder if
Yeah.
like, so-and-so, they're always up to
So
stuff.
that
Like,
would be better than like, okay, but seriously, what's your plan
if
somebody
there's drinking,
tries to put
what are
one
you
in your
going to
hand?
do? Yes.
What are you gonna do? Right. I see your version. I hear it. I can do that.
Like, or I wonder if your phone dies, like, kind of being a little bit
Right.
more reflective and kind of,
Yes.
again, coaching them through it as
Just
opposed.
kind of talk out loud.
Yes, because
Yeah.
absolutely, I think, that's what our role is we don't want them to careen off the cliff. And if we're trying to empower them to
Right.
make good decisions, you can definitely speak up when you watch them, you see them going into the guardrails, or you see them, like possibly, turning into a ditch that we don't want them to be into. You can absolutely say something. Like, I'm trying to empower parents as well. It's just kind of viewing it in a different way that I think is helpful.
Awesome. I could listen to you all day. I have just a couple more questions for you, but all of this is super helpful, and I hope everybody's getting some takeaways from it. In our house, our current biggest challenge is attitude. So I hear everything that you're saying, and I'm certain if I do some of these things more often or all of the time, possibly I'll catch less attitude. But let's go like in the moment. Maybe I've done all the right, best things, all the things we talked about, and still somehow I'm met with a tone and a facial expression that suggests I am completely annoying, embarrassing. He's disgusted. I went from like last week I was amazing. This week, all of a sudden I'm an idiot. And I just, he can't stand me. So, and lots of eye rolling, all of that. So what's our move as parents to like and draw a boundary, hold a boundary around that? Like, I wouldn't speak to him in that tone.
Yes.
I wouldn't make those facial expressions. So it's clearly not okay. So what do I do there that can say like, hey, this is the expectation around that. I know you're frustrated. Like, just give me that script.
Definitely.
Without impacting the lines of communication, ruining the relationship.
Absolutely. That's a great question. I will come back to, I don't speak to you that way, because that's definitely like a tool in my toolbox that I use. So keeping in mind, to be a teenager is to be demoralized. I think a lot of time attitude is like their only card to play. It's like their only, like, the only power I have in the situation is to roll my eyes. And I try to relate that to the adults I know that communicate that way. And it makes it easier for me to deal with them when I think like, wow, that's the only way you know how to do this, is to roll your eyes at me. Like, kind of sad. So I try to think about it of like where it's coming from. It's not, unless there's, again, coarse, like, very hurtful language, or like very, very disrespectful, like things, it's like an absolute no. I try to frame it from like, okay, why are they feeling like this? So I use the like, hey, I don't talk to you like that. When I very rarely, if it ever happens, it happens in like the beginning of our therapeutic relationship, where I'll get like ugh, that's so fucking stupid, or like, I don't do that. And I go, whoa, hey, I don't talk to you like that. Like, do I ever? And sometimes if I'm like, do I ever talk to you that way? And they go, no. And I'm like, yeah. Like, so I can back that up. And I'll be like, I really don't appreciate that at all. Like, that's not okay with me. And I try not to be like pedantic, but like, again, kind of try and empower them. We're not treating them like an adult because they're not an adult, but like kind of holding them to that standard of like, that's not okay with me at all. Like, I don't appreciate that at all. I don't talk to you like that. Sometimes if I'm feeling, if parents have the energy, or I'm feeling generous, to be like, do you want to take that again? Not in like a, let's try it again, but like, do you want to try that again with me? Because
it's
like,
not okay, so let's try to say it again.
Yes. Like, or sometimes if I don't have the patience, I'll be like, you can tell me you're angry, you can tell me you don't want to talk about it, like, that's totally fine, but we're not going to say that, or we're not going to do that. And I try to have my like, I'm not very convincing as like a stern figure. So like my babysitter voice of like, well, I have been told,
which I call it the mean mom voice. So yours is the babysitter voice.
Stern babysitter. Or one time, in my old apartment that was not in a great neighborhood, as a process server was looking for my neighbor who hadn't paid rent. He dared to knock on my door at 8 a.m., which I am not a morning person. And I opened it with this look on my face, and he was like, I'm looking for so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, he's not here. I know what you're talking about. And he goes, are you a mom? You got a really scary face when you're mad. It's like, I'm not, but you're welcome. So
Yeah.
you can put, but it's
That's
in a way
hilarious.
that's like,
I mean business.
it's not like a demeaning, like, I'm here, you're here, I'm the parent, you're the child, listen, because that's what causes the demoralization.
Right.
That's what, but you want to be like,
Yep.
if we're going to be, you know, kind of emotional equals in this interaction, like, this is what I'm expecting from you. So, like, please do not do
Yeah.
that. This is not okay.
Okay.
Um,
That's really
so either
helpful.
giving them an option to do it over, modeling as best you can, like, you can say it like this, you can say it like that, but you're not going to do what you just did. And if you
Mhm.
get it, I
Okay.
think sometimes maybe the best you'll get is like a and like a storming off, which, like,
Yeah.
okay, I would not chase, or I would not like try to solve it in that moment
Mhm.
because they're clearly like dysregulated. So you can like
Right.
wait a couple minutes, come to them and be like, hey, I really want to talk about what happened earlier. And like, I don't appreciate the way that you said that to me, and that's not how we talk in our family. I know you're
Mhm.
frustrated, and I totally get that. So, like, if you want to talk about it now, we can, or we can talk about it later. And then I would try to deliver a consequence after that conversation, because I think that's totally appropriate. Like, you can set that as far as your expectations, consequences, and rewards. Like, we don't do that. Like, something, this has been found in research to be one of the indicators of divorce is contempt, which is like mocking, like
Mm.
imitating somebody or saying like, "Are you gonna cry about it? Are you gonna cry?" Look, that sends me. That sends me. Like,
I'm only laughing because we each have a voice we use when we're saying something that the other person said. I mean, we do it in like a jokey, like, oh,
yeah,
that's how I sound. This is a little more negative what you're talking about, but
yes,
that's it has such a reaction when you do that.
yes, and so they're definitely like, if everyone's in on the joke, that's one thing, but like, that's not
Right.
something I handle well, and like, that's, you know, something that's
Yeah.
like, for example, I would set as like, we do not do that to each other when we're upset. Like, that's not how we say things to each other. And setting that as an expectation when you're kind of having like a business meeting with your adolescent about how maybe you want to change things is like, that's not okay. Or
Right.
like, something else I really don't like is slamming cabinets, slamming doors, like slamming things out of anger, and being like, that's when you can deliver a consequence and be like, hey, we talked about that. Like, you know, that's a consequence of like no phone tonight, or that's a consequence of like we're not doing X, Y, and Z. And if you get to like, it's
Yep.
not fair, I don't understand, be like, I'm sorry, that was what we agreed to. It doesn't have to go. I think something a lot of parents do, and again, it's coming from a good place, is pivoting into lecturing. Which I think, from parents' perspective, they're like, I'm trying to get you to see it my way. Like, I'm trying to get, like, please, I'm not this, like, evil villain that's trying to ruin your life. Like, I'm trying to help you here. And all kids here is literally the Charlie Brown, like, wah, 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 like, because they've heard it before. So just,
My son is fond of saying not to me to his stepdad. Let me go get my notebook out. Yeah, that doesn't go particularly well in either
I mean,
either direction.
no, it doesn't. But also, like, I can kind of see where he's coming from. Of like, I've heard like that's also kind of going into the demoralization of like, you think like, oh my god, you think I don't know? Like, come on now, like,
Right.
I'm not stupid either.
Right.
Skip over that and just be like, refer back to the contract. Like, you know, this is what we agreed to. You know that, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah.
And you can kind of
Yeah.
like remove. I use this a lot with my ADHD kids because I think verbal reminders, number one, don't work for anyone who has ADHD. Number two, I think they really tend to erode the parent-child relationship. Like, it's the same thing with partners. Like, if you're like, sweetie, the dishwasher, it's like, oh my god, like, shut up with the dishwasher, like, oh. And I think the same thing happens with parents. So if you have anything visual that you can refer to, anything like, you know, like the contract, to be like, nope, that's what we talked about. Like, and you don't have to get into it.
Yeah.
You don't have to, you know, frankly, I feel like when anybody is above like a 7 on an emotional scale, trying to talk to them is just not going to be productive.
Because that part of their brain is not online anymore.
I'll use the phrase all the time. That is not productive. Like, I use it for kids. I use it for parents. Like, who can understand what that word means? I'll be like, we're not doing that. That's not productive. Like, so slamming things, or, you know, using coarse language or mocking, like, not productive. We're not doing that. We don't do that here. So you can definitely set that expectation. And I also want to encourage, like, I don't want to be mocking now, but sometimes like their reactions are so funny. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, if you could see yourself, like, this is. I have one client.
And humor, like that's what I lean on the most. I mean, I think that's just my style. I use humor when I'm nervous, and I use humor when I can feel like a conflict coming. But that really speaks to my son, like a lot of the diffusing that I do involves humor. Not the mocking like you mentioned before, but just something like, if we can both look at each other and just laugh at the situation, like it's done pretty much.
Yes. I definitely, like, I will do it with some of my clients who'll be like, whoa, like, where'd you pull that one from? Like, and they can kind of laugh about it with me too. So you can definitely use that, especially with someone you know very well. But also really try to consider, like, and you can have this discussion with them, but also for yourself personally, like, what can I let go? Like, if you see them roll their eyes in the rearview mirror, like, let it go. Like, if you hear,
not
like,
everything has to be
again, that's where, like, that's their only card to play. That's like, we don't want to be too hard on them about it. If you really feel like you need to say something, you can be like, hey, give them options. You can do this or you can do this, but you can't do that. And giving
that brings me to my next question, because I'm I'm remarried, so there's a stepdad in the picture, and he was brought up very, very differently than I was. More of the, tell me the parenting styles again. What's the Athara one that we don't want?
Authoritarian.
Yes. Brought up that way, which is not my style at all. And then I'm, of course, co-parenting with his biological dad, who's probably more of a permissive parent. So we have like 3 very different parenting styles going on at the same time. We all mean well, but that's hard. It's hard for us. I'm sure it's hard for our kid. So if a parent's listening to all this and thinking like, this is great, or this advice is all well and good for me, my partner is never gonna think that, they're never going to try to implement this, or maybe they're in their own dysregulated place where this is just out of their grasp right now. What's the advice to the parent who wants to be implementing this and maybe their partner can't, won't, whatever?
It's a really great question. Definitely one I see a lot as well. One of the biggest lessons I've taken away from the work that I do is, like, just marry someone who's like you. Opposites do not attract. Like, just make sure that you think the same way about stuff. But then again, a lot of times it's inevitable. You don't really understand or know, like, what you're going to be like as a parent until you hold your baby in your arms. So I will say, I think it's helpful to think about the motivations. I think when I see permissive parenting, parents are very concerned with their child's emotional experience, and they don't want to be emotionally damaging. I think when I see authoritarian parenting, I see parents who are really concerned about the world, about their child being successful, and about wanting to provide structure. Both of those things are good. So the kind of the pitch for authoritarian is like, we're doing both of those things together. So I think it's helpful if you suggest these changes to your partner and they go like, and again, or hopefully there's no eye rolling. That would, grant great communication. I am the queen of eye rolling, is saying, like,
me too,
in a non-combative way, like, hey, what are you concerned about with this? Or like, what do you think, not like, what do you think is not going to work about this, but like a genuine, like, I really want to be a team with you on this. Like, what are your concerns? I really want to hear them because I want to be able to help. And having them be like, well, if we're just letting them walk all over us if we do that, or like, we're just like, we're being too harsh if we do that. And hearing them and saying like, okay, yeah, I definitely see that from your perspective. Like, I have a concern too. Can we try this out? Like, can we just see if this works? Like, because I promise you, if it doesn't work, and like we actually try and like try for a month or 6 weeks, can we just try this? And if I promise, I can admit that I'm wrong, and like we'll figure something else out. But like, I'm really at my wit's end here, and like I'm feeling really frustrated. I know you are too. Like, can we just try this? I think a lot of times, like, speaking to what their concern actually is, because not to be stereotypical, but stereotypically what I find is that the parent who is more authoritarian tends to be a male parent, tends to have a lower tolerance for emotional distress, and does kind of see all the back and forth as like nonsense and like, let's just get to this and do it. And they struggle with that in the first place. So validating that part of like, I'm not trying to change who you are. Like, you can still be that parent for him or them. They really need that. In this moment, can we try this? Or like, in this moment, can we try that? Or you can even like deflect it to me. Like, I'm happy to do that, but I just need, like, really what kids need to see is that parents are a united front. You don't have to be fully united behind closed doors, but that the kids perceive you to be a united front because they can spot out.
That's really useful.
The weaknesses.
Yeah.
Yes. Very, awesome. Very adeptly.
I feel like I'm going to need to have you back to break down all the parenting styles.
That's It's one of my favorite topics. I would love to talk about that.
All right, we're gonna stay tuned. We're gonna do that.
as far as permissive, stereotypically, I do find that it's like a female parent who is really concerned about their child's emotional experience, and that's I would find probably someone who's typically easier to negotiate with or kind of easier to get on your side and be like, hey, you're already there. Like, you care so much about them. Like, you're there for them. Like, there's no question in that part. Like, I feel like they need the structure. Like, you can even lean on, it doesn't totally help, but like in a non-judgmental way, like, this method really seems to work. Like, I'm hearing really good things about it. Like, and again, can we just try it? And I promise if you see holes in it or it doesn't work for you, like, we will figure something else out. That can be really helpful. Because I think, I shouldn't want to say this, but I find adults are so motivated to change when it's about their kids. If it's about themselves or their partner, they're frankly not that interested. If it's about their kids, they will move hell or high water
So coming at it
to make that change and be like, we're really doing this for them, and I really just want to try it. Can we you can even be like, a humor me. Like, sometimes I even say to parents, like,
Yes.
please prove me wrong. Like, please prove me wrong.
Right. Let's do an experiment. We'll just see how it
you
plays
have to
out.
but you have to come back with the data. Like, you have to come back every single time. I did this happened, and it didn't work, Liz. See?
Right.
And they rarely have that because when they actually follow through, that so much of parenting is consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. More than approach. So many good takeaways today. One more question for you. What is one thing that you have learned on this journey of supporting families so far that we haven't discussed yet that you just really want them to hear and know today before they find it out, down the road?
Excellent question. I always go back to, so I work with, a lot of adolescent girls and specializing in trauma. You can imagine the kind of like cases that I get and the kind of topics that we talk about. And I've worked with a lot of kids who are really going through it and their families are going through it. I was talking to one of my clients who graduated recently. She's doing really well. And right beforehand, we were kind of talking about an issue with her mom, and she'd been through hospitalization. She'd been, in trouble at school, like all kinds of stuff. And she was like, I was like, do you care about what your mom thinks? And she's like, are you kidding me? Of course I care about what my mom thinks. Like, all kids care about what their parents think, Liz. Like, that's so important. And like, I think as a parent, that's really important to keep in mind, is that like, no matter what eye rolls you're getting, no matter what attitude you're getting back, like, they're still your kid and they care. If they didn't, so Teens Who Hurt talks about when you should really be concerned is a kid who seems completely checked out from your relationship, who seems completely checked out from their own lives. That means they don't care. If they're giving you a reaction, if they're getting emotional about it, it's because you're my mom and I care about what you think. Like, you're my dad and like, I want you to be proud of me. Like, that is always where they're coming from deep down, even if they will deny it to your face. Like, and this was a troubled client who told me that, who had many, many really emotional conversations with her mom and was telling me that. And I've had many, I ask my clients, like, do you care what your mom thinks? And they'll be like, yes. Like, it's like, duh. Like, of course I do. Like, I wouldn't even be talking to you about this if I didn't care. So I think that's the essential.
And that's helpful because I can see that big emotion through a different filter.
Yeah. Yes. So I think that's important to remember. And I think if there's any kid listening, I don't know, they probably aren't, but like, your parents, they're trying to help. They're trying their best. Yeah. I think if you work together, you can have a better result. And they do love you. I try to tell all families that come in, like, you being here shows so much, because I've talked to families on the phone that I know needed to come in and did not want to, or they didn't end up doing it. Like, you're here because you love each other. Like, I know that's why. So keeping that in mind is always helpful.
Yeah. Wonderful. Liz, thank you so much for joining me. Listeners, thanks for listening, for watching. I'll be back soon with more stuff that I wish I knew sooner and other parents and parent supporters want us to know sooner. In the meantime, I will leave you with my list of stuff that I have learned the hardest way. Your to-do list will always be there, so make sure you put yourself on it. You can't pour from an empty cup, so schedule ways to refill yours every day. And applicable to what we were talking about today, there is no one way to be a perfect parent. There's no any way to be a perfect parent, and so many ways to be a really good one. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and I'll be back soon.